All right, we're live. By hook or by crook, I'm gonna make this thing happen. So I kind of told myself I wanted to start doing Tuesday night live streams. I'm kind of biting an idea from my boy Fearless, but I wanted to make my Tuesday night live streams. Let me go live on Instagram here. Um, I wanted to make my Tuesday night live streams not necessarily work related. I wanted to make it relate to stuff that I find interesting and fun stuff that I like to talk about. Um, Regardless. And so here's the challenge. Tonight, it's been a comedy of errors trying to get my live stream up and running. I planned to start this thing about 8 and everything went wrong. So this is going to be an abridged version. So I'm just considering this the pilot of the Tuesday night live stream for Blurting While Dad. Blurting While Dad is really just my platform to talk about Black fatherhood, nerd stuff, comic books, whatever is going on in current events, kind of the whole shebang of bang. And so I have a lot on my mind that I wanted to touch base on. And so initially I planned this out as like a 2 or 3 hour live stream. But yeah, you know how things go. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and roll my intro and I'm going to get into my topics. Okay, so the Blurting While Dad stream is really just kind of my outlet. It's an extension because I used to do the Long Boxing While Black podcast, and I would talk about comic books, political issues, Black fatherhood, and a lot of other stuff. And I figured I'd come up with a separate brand to kind of capture that. So on tonight's live stream, it's going to be a bridge one. So I'm just going to give y'all the heads up. This is going to be a little bit shorter than what I wanted it to do. This is my soft launch. So I want to talk about John Henryism. I want to talk about dealing with some grief, Black fatherhood, and some stuff about the new comic book movies that are dropping. I'm not going to get to all of these. So I'm going to go with the stuff that's on the top of my mind first. Okay. And to me, the John Henryism and Black grief thing and Black fatherhood are kind of tied together. So walk with me a little bit. For those that don't know what John Henryism is, John Henry is the steel driving man. Essentially, what John Henry was a brother, a folk hero, and he outworked the railroad. Like he outworked the machine that was driving the railroad spikes and stuff like that, and he drove himself to death doing it. And he ended up becoming a folk hero because he was able to outwork the machine. Um, and this is kind of one of those turns of phrases, one of them nomenclatures that kind of came up based on something that happened in pop culture somewhere along the line. And it kind of came up from this. John Henryism is the idea. Okay, so, and I need to kind of hip y'all to this. There's going to be a lot of me talking about Black experience and stuff like that. So if you ain't aligned with that, this may not be the platform for you. I just got to keep it real with y'all. If you're cool with it, that's fine. But if you're not, this is not the platform for you. Specifically regarding, and I may be breaking up, so my internet's kind of flaky. John Henryism is really the idea that Black men have to drive themselves to death. And we have to kind of ensure our mental health, our physical well-being to take care of everybody, to be the provider for everybody. And it kind of ties into where my life is and where it was previously to it and how hard I am on myself. One of the unique things about dealing with grief is it pops up in different places, right? I'm dealing with the loss of a family member, a close family member right now. And when the last time I did this, because a couple months ago I lost my godmother. And then previous to that, it was my mom. One of the things that I remember very clearly, and I don't remember a lot about what happened around my mom passing. I have big blind spots in my experience with that, like huge gaps, like time gaps that are just gone. I don't remember it. It was very traumatic, the way it came down. But one of the things I remember clearly thinking is when I was going through my grief, I had to moderate my grief and moderate how I felt so that I could be there for the kids to get through theirs. And I kind of had to put a lot of my stuff on the back burner. And it was a pattern of things that I had done previously before. Um, I lost a childhood friend. You know, they died in police custody. And the first thing I had thought was, well, I need to go to work. Still, bills ain't going to pay themselves. I didn't even give myself time to mourn that one. And I'm standing in at the job, and my supervisor had seen what happened and everything. First thing they said to me, now mind you, this friend had died in police custody, and it was really strange what happened. Like there was, the word cover up was kind of thrown around. First thing my supervisor said to me after finding out that somebody I'd grown up with since I was like 3 or 4 years old died in police custody is like, well, I'm glad his parents did. I'm glad his dad didn't come out and blame the police. I took it in stride. Um, it's kind of a pattern of this weird self-sacrifice thing that I felt I had to do just to make sure everybody else is okay. And it's not just necessarily me. My wife has done it too, um, where she puts her priorities and her needs on the back burner to make sure we're okay. And I do the same. From an emotional standpoint, I am not fine right now. I'm pretty damn sad. Um, that's what it is. And so that's why I wanted to kind of hump on the live stream because this is real. This is real. This you're getting the real experience with me. And so, but it is one of those things. I realized how my relationship to work was really, really super unhealthy. My relationship to providing was super unhealthy. I shaved years off my life. In the idea that I needed to go out and overachieve so that I could provide more for my family. Um, I was I took a job that was, giving me heart palpitations and cardiovascular issues. I would go, work 16 hours and I wouldn't eat. And it was all part of the grind, is what I had to do to make sure my family was taken care of. And here's the crazy part. I didn't necessarily have to do that. It was what I chose to do because I felt it like it was my burden to do. You know, I had to go put in these insane hours on a salaried position just to make sure um, everything I overachieved and I could move up the ladder and look like an appealing candidate to the powers that be. I took years off my life working in youth care, and I'm not saying that lightly. Um, it was years. I have ADHD and I've been unmedicated for a good part of my life. And I was on ADHD medication, and I kept asking for higher and higher dosages just so that I could focus on the things I needed to focus on, knowing that um, it probably, I had high blood pressure, and knowing that these are things that I needed to, in my mind, this is what I needed to do in order to move up the ladder so I could be a better provider for my family. I eh, I put that on. I put my life on the back burner, my health on the back burner, to make sure that my family was taken care of. That is John Henryism. That is the drive. And here's the crazy part. So a lot of times media, especially, um, you know, media likes to, um, and they still do it. They still attribute, black folks with laziness and stuff like that. Some of a lot of the hardest working brothers I know, like a lot of the hardest working people I know, are black, and they're out here grinding and pushing themselves way past um, their limits of. And my phone's blowing up. Pushing themselves way past their limits of um, what is sane or reasonable or rational, just to make sure that their people are taken care of. That's a real thing. We're driving ourselves to death. We're working ourselves to death. Um, Here's the crazy part. So by the time I had reached the age of 36, the ripe old age of 36, by the time I reached the ripe old age of 36, I had accomplished everything I had ever set out to do in my chosen career. And I mean, I had moved all the way up the ladder to where I wanted to be. I wanted to run my own program. I was running my own program. That was the second time running my own program, in fact. Um, I was, a seat or two away from C-suite, like executive. The only thing that would have kept me from going straight for an executive position was I didn't have my master's at the time. Um, I had achieved everything that I had set out to achieve, and I felt so empty. All the time I had missed with my kids, all the times that I missed with my wife, all the stuff that I didn't get to experience um, with my children, to climb this ladder and be the ultimate provider in a field that is basically taking a vow of poverty. Like, I don't know if y'all know this, but human services, any kind of human services, is kind of a vow of poverty. Um, for managing, um, as many staff as I have done, and as many trainings as I had to accomplish, as many responsibilities I had to have, as many certifications I had to carry. Um, to get paid less than $60,000 a year, to do all that, and be the person that that represents the organization, down in, when talking to politicians and stuff, I wasn't making enough, nearly enough. But for me, it was on paper, and really, I'd reached the pinnacle of my accomplishments, and I really felt the emptiest. I had shaved all these years off my life chasing this imaginary on this hamster wheel, running and running and running, chasing this thing. And when I ended up reaching the goal, it didn't feel like anything. There was no balance. I always saw relaxation as a luxury. I always saw the ability to not have to think about work, as some kind of luxury that I would earn one day through hard work. I spent shoot, how many years? I spent almost 6 or 7, no, about 7 or 8 years on call, which means at any given time my phone could ring and I had to go to work. Um, and I don't know how long I would have been at work. I spent a good chunk of my life on call, and I chose that life for myself because I thought that was the best pathway forward to move up the corporate ladder, to provide for me and my family, blah, 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 blah. That is John Henryism in a nutshell. And that's how it affected me. When it came to grief, I encapsulated my grief that same way. I have to be the strongest person in the room. I have to be everybody's rock. I have to be the stable person. I didn't allow myself a moment of weakness. And I beat myself up. I felt guilt when I was paralyzed by grief, when I was inactive, when I was numb to my feelings. I punished myself for that. And it's something that I still do. I do punish myself for my grief, and I try not to. Um, you know, I try to, and it's not something I intentionally do, y'all. Like, I try not to make my grief somebody else's burden, or um, you know, be the saddest person in the room. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about, but it is what it is. So, um, that's one of the things, and I had a longer conversation planned for it, but I'm abridging a lot because I don't have a lot of time. Okay. Next week, hopefully, when I come back on the Tuesday stream, I'm going to have more time because I'm going to start it playing it out a little bit earlier and be able to spend a little bit more time with y'all. Okay. And there was no real big rollout or no agenda. It's just me and it's whatever's on my chest. Okay. Um, if you have any comments about John Henryism, specifically when it comes to black men, and specifically for brothers, I mean, that's kind of our tradition. Like, we brag about how our fathers and grandfathers and uncles work themselves to the bone just to put food on the table and make sure that their kids are taken care of, and make sure that we had clothes on our backs and stuff like that. Like, that's a point of pride for us. Um, and It's something that we internalize and use as our modus operandi to go out and overachieve. I got sucked into that, and a lot of '90s babies did, or a lot of '70s and '80s babies did, I should say. Kids that came of age during the '80s and '90s. If you're black, this is what you heard: you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. That was our driving. That was our motivating thing. You got to work twice as hard to get half as far. And a lot of us internalize that message, saying that I always have to overachieve. Anything less than excellence is a failure. Anything less than excellence is a failure. There is no such thing as good enough. There's no room. If I go to college, I got to graduate in 4 years, otherwise I failed. If I take these courses, I got to get A's in these courses, otherwise I failed. If I take this job, I have to have I have to be the highest performer on my team, otherwise I failed. That was my mindset. And I sacrificed a lot on the altar of achievement. Um, but it's not just me. A lot of folks my age, we grew up with that, bro. That was kind of the beginning of the idea of Black excellence and the Black excellence movement, where you had to outperform. And our parents told us it, drilled it into our heads, man. Like it got drilled into my head. You are going to have to work twice as hard as everybody else to get the same opportunity. And that ended up becoming pretty much instructive of everything else I've ever done. Being a business owner, feeling like I have to overachieve and over deliver vastly on every single project. I feel like I have to overachieve and over deliver on it, because that thing in the back of my mind, Brian, you have to work twice as hard to get your opportunities, because that's how the world is. Little black boys have to grind harder than everybody else. Little black girls have to push it harder than anybody else to get the same opportunities and be considered, to have the same space at the table. And that ended up becoming my motivating factor, bro. Like I said, I shaved years off my life believing that and beating myself up for being above average on a lot of things. And times where I could have just turned in an average performance and I would have been perfectly fine. But but I would have beat myself up because average isn't good enough. You have to go above and beyond in every front. So when we talk about John Henryism, that's kind of what it is, and that's what it falls into. Feeling the pressure to outperform everybody, including yourself, at all times. And for me, I felt the pressure that I have to outperform everybody. Not only have to outperform everybody, but I always have to shoulder the burden of everything. I have to make sure that I am going above and beyond to try to take care of the family. Otherwise, I'm a failure. You know, that's what it felt like. And so, like I said, I would backburner my own grief um, just to make it. Losing childhood friend and going to work the next day within hours. Somebody I've grown up with since I was like 3. And I'm like, well, bills still got to get paid. When I lost my mom, I didn't want to grieve harder than my kids because I had to be stronger than them. I had to be stronger for them. So I had to take that away from myself. Anyway, I done beat y'all over the head with all this sad shit. I'm gonna move on because I told you I'm kind of up and down emotionally. I am kind of sad, and that's just what it is. So we talked about John Henryism, and I kind of abridged that conversation. Grief is different. I talked about that. That'll probably be a future conversation. Like I said, this isn't a bridge podcast or live stream. I'm gonna save that conversation because that's a deeper conversation. Let's talk nerd shit. So I guess I feel like I'm kind of in a minority here because I'm legitimately excited for the new Superman movie and the new Fantastic Four movie. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the last Superman movie I saw in theaters, it wasn't the Man of Steel movie. I saw that on streaming. The last Superman movie I saw in theaters was that Brandon Ralph thing, Bryan Singer Superman, where he didn't punch anything. He didn't do anything for the whole movie. Like he didn't do anything. He caught an airplane, um, and then got shanked up like it was an episode of Oz, oddly, weirdly out of nowhere in like the third act. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and go watch it because it's so jarring. This really lighthearted Superman movie where, he's just flying around being Superman and cheesing and smiling at the camera and everything. And then the third act, he gets like McManus just comes out the cut, stabs him in the back with a kryptonite shank and breaks it off. Then they try to drown him in a puddle. It had really no place in the movie. It was just there. That's the last Superman movie I saw in theaters. I don't count Batman versus Superman as an theater experience. I count that as kind of like an acid trip, if that makes sense. Because Batman versus Superman was surreal. To watch my wife, and I'm probably going to do a podcast specifically about that. Watching my wife experience Batman versus Superman is probably one of the highlights of my life. It's one of the most comedic experiences I've ever had, and it happened right after my mom died. So it's one of the fond memories I do have of that time, which was really hard. Watching my wife experience Batman versus Superman in theaters, because there was literally a point where I felt Brandy completely just check out. Like she just said, nope, I am done. Like mentally, her brain just gave up. It couldn't take it anymore. She was confused. I think we're sitting there and I think some reveal where Lex Luthor actually says he's Lex Luthor. And she's like, wait, that's not the Riddler? It's not the Joker? No, it's Lex Luthor. And she gave up. Like her brain just said, nope, I'm done. So I'm excited about the new Superman movie because I think I like James Gunn's movies. Watching the trailers is great for me because I am a huge fan of like B, C, and D list characters, and I love when people embrace them. Seeing Guy Gardner and Mr. Terrific and stuff get their shine and get opportunity to do stuff. I'm excited to see that. And so I feel like it was going to take a deep dive into Superman lore, and it's going to try to make up for the nothing that happened in some of these Superman movies. I know Batman versus Superman was supposed to be this action-packed magnum opus. It was a confusing, loud mess. I will die on that hill. That movie was terrible. It was terrible in a bad way and terrible in a good way. And the Bryan Singer Superman movie was good if you just like watching Christopher Reeve fly around and not really face any stakes. Then that Bryan Singer Superman movie was great. But then like you get to the third act and you get to watch Superman get shanked up and almost drowned in a puddle. So it balances out. I'm excited to see it because I want to see what James Gunn is able to do with it. He is a deep cut nerd. He likes to take deep cuts with his characters. I've seen it in Peacemaker, in the Suicide Squad, where these characters are relatively comic accurate. But he still infuses it with his own personality. Guardians of the Galaxy, even as a Marvel property, it wasn't really that big of a Marvel property as a comic book. It had a cult following, but it wasn't like they weren't considered anywhere on the front line of Marvel superheroes. None of them really were. And he was able to do that. He's able to, James Gunn was able to embrace that and make us care about these characters. So I'm excited to see what he does with it. I want to see what he does driving the DC bus, because I've been disappointed by DC movies for many, many years. Just consistently let down by every DC movie, wanting it to be good. So anyway, what I want to do is, and also I'm interested to see what the Fantastic Four movie is. My boy Jimmy has different opinions about it. I'm excited to see what it is. I think that you almost had to do like this You had to do you had to do a period piece for the Fantastic Four. And I got to wrap this up because I got to get running. But and I'll leave this as open ended conversation. Hopefully, maybe we can resume it after I see the movie. But Fantastic Four had to be a period piece, and it had to be take place in an alternate universe because otherwise it muddies a lot of stuff that happened with Avengers and timelines and all that other stuff. So it had to exist in a time and universe that was separate from the main Marvel universe. And I'm not mad about the female Silver Surfer. I don't even really care. I just don't. I hope they get Galactus right. Galactus sucked the last couple of times. I hope they get it right. So I'm excited to see. Ben Grimm is one of my literally like one of my top 3 favorite characters. I read the Thing comic book when I was little, like his solo series. I read that. And I was 100% invested in the character. I was always pulling for him to beat the Hulk. It didn't happen, but it rarely happened, I should say. And so I was kind of a Fantastic Four nerd, and so I want to see what they're able to do with that property. Thunderbolts was good. From what I saw, I haven't seen all of it, but I enjoyed the pieces of it that I saw. I actually got to sit down and watch that. I am not as death on comic book movies as a lot of my fellow nerds are, where every comic book movie has to be amazing, otherwise it sucks. I don't believe that. I'm old enough to have grown up where just by virtue of something being a comic book movie, it was going to suck. And so having competent comic book movies to me is amazing, to live in a time where a comic book movie is going to drop and it's not going to be absolute garbage. So I'm excited for whatever comes out. That being said, I don't want to see a bad one, but I don't think the Marvel movie that I could say was bad to me was like the second Thor. I thought that was bad. I thought that was a bad movie. It was uninteresting. The characters are uninteresting. Nobody really understood the stakes of the movie. It just kind of sucked all the way around. And I think it wasted a couple of really good characters from the Thor mythos. I liked Thor: Love and Thunder. I didn't have an issue with it. So bad comic book movies used to be the norm. I think that a lot of times if the comic book movie isn't amazing, people think it's terrible, and I don't necessarily believe in that. But anyway, thanks for those that have popped in. Like I said, this is just kind of my pilot. I want to do Tuesday night live streams, and I want to get them started around 7-ish, and spend some time on here and actually have some real conversations with y'all. So it wasn't necessarily for y'all to tune into. I do appreciate y'all's time. I got to get running. Talk to y'all later. I'm going to go ahead and roll this intro, and we'll be out. Peace.